we both went through medicine in a time where if you complained of being tired, you were weak. This is Sick Health with Kevin Ban, MD. Our show helps you navigate our broken healthcare system and take control of your own health. Hi, I'm Kevin Ban, an emergency physician with over 25 years of clinical experience. Most recently, I was the chief medical officer at Walgreens, where I led the national pandemic response.
Hello, I'm Alex Wallace. I'm a longtime journalist. I was an executive at NBC News and most recently at Yahoo.
Our healthcare system is severely broken. The goal of this show is to help you and your families navigate through it. There will be times when you need to be in the healthcare system, and we will be here for help.
The best way to support this show at no cost is by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Find us at Sick Health with Kevin Ban, MD. Today, we have one case. We're doing a single case today, and that is because we have a really incredible guest. Dr. John Cronin is one of the top sleep experts that exists. He and Kevin have known each other a long time. I'm obsessed with sleep. Cannot wait to hear what he has to tell us.
But first, today's episode is brought to you by C2 Sense. C2 Sense is working hard to bring lab-quality diagnostic equipment into the home, priced for everyone. Learn more at haloreader.com. That's HALOREADER.com. All right, we're ready to roll here, John. It's great to see you here, and thank you so much for being on the show. Little intro to get us started. Alex sort of alluded to it, and that is that you and I had to do the math yesterday when we connected, and we literally took out our iPhones and a calculator because we met in 1987. So we have known one another for over 37 years. And the fact that we're here doing this is awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, math is hard. That's what I found out last night because I could have sworn it was, a few years less than that. But man, 37 years, and it's been a great ride. And you're a treasured friend across so many different experiences. And I'm really excited to be here with you and Alex and talk sleep.
Yep. So let's talk sleep. But before we do it, a little bit about John. John trained in sleep medicine at Harvard. He became the director of the Scripps Sleep Center in San Diego. And he now is working on innovations to help people with sleep abnormalities. So, John, you really have touched on all things. And so you're a great resource. You were the guy who I called. You know this. I've called about myself. I've called about my family. So you are my go-to guy. And I want to start here. And I'll ask the simple question, like, why do we sleep?
Wow, you're really jumping right in there, Kevin. Well, I appreciate the trust you've had in me, Kevin, with your sleep and your health and your families. And sleep affects everyone, right? So it's the most relatable thing in my career that I've done in healthcare. Like you, I've done different things in critical care and respiratory medicine. But the thing people always come back to and are really engaged with is talking about their sleep, because everyone has their experience. And you've really hit on kind of the $1 million question, which is, why do we sleep? And I think there's probably not one answer. I actually have developed my own sort of mnemonic as I think about this, which is clean sleep. First and foremost, sleep is about the central nervous system. So I'll ask you or Alex at any point to think anything that the brain does is affected by sleep, and so much more. And so think of this as really a process of the central nervous system, which governs all of our health. But in terms of that mnemonic, so first and foremost, clean. So there's some really cool new science that's coming out that shows that basically our brains use sleep to housekeep, right? So when the lights go out and the eyes shut and the brain goes to sleep, there are these incredible new processes that are being discovered where these channels open up in the brain. And the cerebrospinal fluid, so the fluid that bathes the brain, begins to have pulsatile flow and essentially clear out the canals. So my imagery is like the canals of Venice. Let's clean them up. Venice has had a great day, a lot of tourists, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned out. So the brain is being sort of cleaned, nourished, and restored after a really extended period of sleep.
I'm going to jump in there, John, and say that it was really interesting to me that when I was in medical school, when we were in medical school, there wasn't a way that we understood that the brain detoxed, right? We always talk about different organs, kidneys and the liver, and it seemed like every organ in some way cleansed itself, detoxed, right? But not the brain. And so this literature, this understanding is pretty new. I remember one time, not too long ago, you and I stayed up talking about this for a couple of hours. So how new is this research and where does it come from?
It's really within the last 2 decades. And there's a couple of groups in Rochester and in Washington, University in St. Louis, some in Europe, really looking at this and exploring it. And so, the basic story now is looking at animal models, but now appreciating in humans that this system exists and understanding just kind of all of the nuances and intricacies about it. It's not just about cleaning the brain, but it's probably also about nourishing the brain, bringing glucose, bringing neurotransmitters, all these things that our brains need to optimally function, bringing those to bear. So it's actually quite interesting. And really, maybe to jump ahead just a little bit, we also know that when you are sleep deprived, that same system is impaired. It leaves your brain a little dirty when you're not getting enough sleep. That's more figurative language, but there's sort of science behind the fact that you aren't clearing those things. You're not nourishing the brain in the same way that I guess the system is ideally designed for.
Well, let's get into that. So that's really interesting. I wanted to talk about sleep deprivation. So what you're essentially saying is when we're sleep deprived, we're also not doing a good job of cleansing the brain. Do I have that right?
That seems to be what the evidence suggests. Right, exactly. This science is so new. So I think the scientists, the neuroscience around this is very careful to sort of incrementally build this story to understand what happens when that system is impaired. Is this just a transitory change? And so let's say your brain doesn't clear all of the metabolites from a hard day of effort, right? So you're up, you're using your brain is producing these metabolites, and that system is designed to clear it out. Well, if you don't get enough sleep, what happens if you don't clear all of that out? And I think these are really important open questions that we don't have full answers to. But I think the ability to project to say, well, if you're not clearing that out, that's at best not good for your function. At worst, that's not good for your brain. And at the very worst, that's damaging to your brain. And so, one model that I've thought about over the years and more recently is this idea that sleep loss or sleep deprivation is almost like a little bit of brain trauma. We're not quite there yet, and we don't want to, raise the fire alarm when unnecessarily to make people concerned. But I think the perception out there is, for most part, some of sleep is elective. I'll get my sleep when I die type of thing. That you hear a lot of that motto out there, which I think we're all subject to on in certain situations. But ultimately, you might look at it very differently, and you might see depriving yourself of sleep is really injurious to you.
That's something that you and I are both subject to, because we both went through medicine in a time where if you complained of being tired, you were weak, right? And so, this is something that I once you said to me, no one ever says to you or criticizes you for being hungry or being thirsty, but sleep is the exact same biologic need, and yet we've tended to treat it differently.
Can you tell me what is impaired when you don't get sleep? I mean, I know we all worry about driving but what other things, and we all feel a little foggy headed. What other parts of daily life are impacted by lack of sleep?
Well, this gets back to Alex, to my mnemonic that I was talking about, clean sleep. So with the sleep word, so S, smart, we know that sleep is critically important for learning. So having sleep before a learning episode sort of sets your brain up for the best or optimal acquisition of information. It's also important for learning. So taking what you've acquired and then processing that and encoding that in your brain for memory. So learning, memory, executive function. So making high-level decisions, as you and Kevin always do. That takes a really high efficient, high functioning brain. And I think we've all had that experience when, maybe you just wake up from sleep and you're very groggy headed because you're not really optimally functioning. We think about emotions, and we know that sleep deprivation leads to, let's say, an imbalance in our emotions, more negative emotions, anger, irritability, frustration, been there, done that, right? And then we think about performance, and performance could be broadly, but you can think of physical performance. And there are places where they research this, and elite Olympic athletes really train around this. Like when is your training the best? Because you're looking for that 1% to 2% edge for your competitors. Well, it might be when you train, when you perform, when you run your 100-meter hurdle race, when you're at the Paris Olympics.
It's fascinating. I'm just thinking about this because I remember when Arianna Huffington came out with sleep and the importance of sleep. It was really a novel idea. Would you equate it with diet and exercise as one of the 3 pillars of the stool? I'm not a doctor, you guys are, but it feels to me that it's right, that it is maybe equally as important as some of the other things.
Absolutely. In my mind, that is the stool. That is the 3-legged stool: diet, exercise, and sleep. It affects every function in your body, and is part of being whole and well, really. There might be more. I think Kevin might have some ideas as to additional pillars to that, but for me, that's spot on.
Well, I start with sleep, right? Because I feel like it's foundational. And if you're not getting the sleep right, then it's hard to get everything else right. And in a previous episode, I talked about ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and all the physiologic effects. I'm really big into diet and exercise, as you know, but I think there are other things that matter. And here's a plug for it: stress mitigation, relationship building, and then the right amount of clinical care. So you're right. I see it as a sort of a mosaic that needs to come together.
But Alex, I'll come back to that notion to say that these things aren't fully independent. Like what you eat affects how you sleep. How you sleep affects your food choices. Exercise definitely affects sleep. So they're interdependent. In fact, let me ask you, take a guess. What do you think sleep deprivation does to your diet? What type of foods do you like to eat?
Junk food.
Right, exactly. You're not going to be reaching for a bowl of kale chips and grapefruit. You're going to be eating high sugar, high fat foods preferentially. And we know this, and it probably has to do with these hormones that Kevin talked about being dysregulated with sleep deprivation. So they affect each other, and they need to be protected and facilitated independently, but they're also intertwined.
Okay, I'm obsessed with sleep, so I have 150 questions, so Kevin may just have to start waving his hands to get me to stop. Banking sleep. At least this is how I was in college. I would pull an all-nighter, a couple all-nighters, and then I was like, okay, but on the weekend, I'm just going to catch it all up. So I would have 2 hours, and then on the weekend, I would do 12 and 12. Is that a real thing?
It is, absolutely. And I think if you look at now with all these cell phones and fitness trackers and things like that, you can see large societal patterns of sleep behaviors in working adults, usually a little bit more restricted during the week, followed by an extension of sleep on the weekend, hopefully to recover. But I would parse out the difference between banking sleep, which I don't think is really possible, versus recovering a sleep deficit, which is possible. And we all do that.
I'm going to sneak something in here, Alex, even though I know you've got so many questions about this. Social jet lag. So as you're talking about banking sleep, you're talking about maybe catching up on some sleep. What is the concept of social jet lag, and how do you think about it?
Social jet lag basically describes a process of a small amount of jet lag phenomenon, even though you're not traveling anywhere. And it's really a social or an elective dynamic where, hey, I want to stay up late. Usually it's for social things. I want to go to a party with my friends. I want to go to a late night Broadway show, whatever it is. Or, hey, I have to wake up really early to go skiing or something like that. And so you might, on any nightly basis, make a little adjustment to account for that. it's a big popular topic in teenagers, right? So I think most of us can appreciate that teenagers tend to make a transition in teenagers where they naturally and biologically just stay up later, and they like that and they want that. But there's usually a price to pay with that as well, and that's where the jet lag concept comes in.
First of all, I love that you just said that, because I have a 20-year-old son, and I used to sleep till noon every single day when I could, and now I can't. But I watch him, and he does, and I'm like jealous, and I'm also glad it reminds me of being his age. Okay, so question for you about sleep stages. So I wear a ring. It's called the Oura Ring. I know there are a bunch of ways you can track it. I'm fascinated so the first thing I do when I wake up is check my Oura Ring and see how my sleep was. And what's fascinating to me is that all night I'm going in and out of different stages. So what are those stages, and why do we cycle in and out of stages?
Yeah, secret note too. I wear my own Oura Ring, and believe me, I've tried just about every sleep wearable there is, and it's fascinating technology, and it's great, and it's really becoming ubiquitous. So people are curious and concerned about their sleep, and I think it's great feedback in general. But sleep is so our brains go offline, right? It's a different state of consciousness. We don't have any willful behavior or things like that. I won't say that you're unconscious, because there's a neuroscience debate about what is consciousness, and I think like if you have general anesthesia, you're out, right? But when you're asleep, it's a little bit more dynamic. You're dreaming and things like that. But the process of sleep itself, Alex, is very dynamic. And so generally with normal sleep, you should be falling asleep in about 10 to 20 minutes, provided that you have the right context and you're not on, TikTok at 2 a.m. or something like that. And then once you enter sleep, we can observe the brain start to change the output of its machinery. And we do that by measuring brain waves. And so we apply, dozens of electrodes to the scalp, and we can measure these brain waves, and we can see them change, and we can see them progress. And so a sleep cycle is a progression from stage 1 sleep, which is a lighter sleep, stage 2, stage 3, and then that cycle generally is terminated by a bout of REM sleep. Those cycles last about 90 minutes, maybe 120 minutes. And then that cycle's over and it resets for the next one. And so through the night, you'll have 3 or 4 of these cycles throughout the night. And the brain is advancing through these stages of sleep progressively. So it's actually quite dynamic. You're just offline consciously, so you're not really experiencing it.
I just want to be really clear with everyone. None of us have any affiliation with Oura. This is not a commercial. I just happen to love my ring, but there is no connection between any of us and Oura. So, John, what I saw when I first started looking at the data was that I wake up a lot during the night, and I didn't know that I was waking up. Is that normal?
It is normal to wake up at night, and that's one of the things. I mean, I've seen thousands of patients with sleep disorders, and that's a common thing that I have to counsel people. It's really an unrealistic expectation that you don't wake up at night. But then it does beg the question, what does it mean to wake up? Does it mean you're fully alert? Most likely not. Sometimes you unfortunately are. Sometimes it's really just cycling out of REM sleep and then going back into sleep. And so you've woken up, you've turned over, you've had a drink of water, but it really isn't, it's really not an abnormal finding. And then the other thing to do, I think to mention, is really that with these sleep trackers, the way they measure sleep is really by measuring phenomenon around sleep. So they're measuring movement, they're measuring heart rate, they're measuring oxygen level at times. And so they're trying to say you're asleep, but they're not really measuring the brain waves of sleep that I talked to you about. Essentially that is really the core marker of sleep are those brain waves.
Often when I wake up in the middle of the night, usually at least once, I have to go to the bathroom. Okay. And what I found is that, well, I think that this is probably common among many people. So one of the things that I noticed is that in that moment when I'm getting up and I'm going, I into the bathroom, I would be susceptible to thoughts. Hey, I got to make this list, or I have to remember to do that thing, or what if I were to check my email kind of quickly? And they were really intrusive. And so what I did, and of course I was raised by a mother who's, deep into meditation. I started doing it when I was about 9 years old. And I use TM, Transcendental Meditation, and so I focus on a word. And so I literally get up and I start to focus on the word, so that I, in some ways, don't think about the checklist that I might like to put together. And I continue to do that all the way through, back into bed. And then I'm essentially meditating in bed until I fall asleep.
I'll just call that your own Kevin Ban hack. Like, it works, right? And so what is it doing actually? My guess would be that what you're doing is you're preventing the intrusion of all the things that would love to work against you, right? Making the list about your show the next morning that you got to produce, thinking about what your kids are doing. Thoughts seem to take on a different form at night. I think we're all familiar with that. You think about problems differently. And so I think what you're doing with that meditation, I suspect, is that you're just really preventing those intrusive thoughts. You're preventing stimulation. You're not getting on your phone. You're not turning on the light type of thing. You're just trying to keep that brain as close to sleep as possible so that when you're back in bed, you're back in business, basically.
John, one of the things I've noticed is that since people are using sleep trackers more often, they're asking even pretty sophisticated questions about their sleep. One of the comments I hear frequently is, well, I'm sometimes in light sleep, other times I'm in deep sleep, and I don't know. I want that deep sleep. I want the good stuff. Differentiate between light and deep sleep for me.
Yeah, I love it. I want that good. Give me that good stuff, right? Well, first off, I'll just disclose my bias is I'm a big fan of tracking. If nothing else, that it shows people an intention to measure their sleep, to prioritize their sleep. But maybe it falls a little short for some people in terms of what actually it tells them about their sleep. So what we know about sleep tracking is that it measures pretty well when you fall asleep and when you wake up. And then in between those two zones, it tells you a little bit about kind of the quality of sleep that you got. And you're right, it refers commonly to light and deep sleep and REM sleep. I've always had a little bit of a problem with that language because light and deep really seems to define value, like somehow light sleep is less than deep sleep. But remember, when we talked about sleep staging in the brainwaves are working through this process. And so that what we call light sleep is really part of a normal process. It's just a different stage of sleep. And so a normal sleep cycle has predominantly light sleep, a little bit more deep sleep, and then about an equal amount of REM sleep. And so I get concerned when people come away with this false notion that, hey, I've got a problem because I had, 32% light sleep, which might be totally normal for that person.
Do dreams have a physiological purpose? Is that part of the cleansing of the brain, dreaming?
But dreaming is a very fascinating area, right? And I'll have to, just divulge a little bit, as a sleep clinician, when people would start to come in and tell me or talk about their dreams, it's one of those things where you just sort of go, uh-oh, here we go. Because, there's really a lack of deep appreciation of why people dream. I mean, clearly it's an important concept of our brain health and our sleep, the meaning of dreams and why we dream. I don't think anyone has the full answer. But maybe sort of like editing and the visual code of your experience and somehow putting things into memory, things like that. But it certainly is an area of future exploration, I'll say, in terms of why and what the significance of dreaming is.
That's cool. Okay. We are going to take a little break, but coming back after the break, John is going to tell us whether we should take a warm bath or not before we go to sleep.
Folks, C2 Sense is doing important work with its Halo platform, applying technological advances in chemistry, machine vision, and material science to provide both patients and providers with laboratory-level accuracy at low cost when they need it. Now, the pandemic reinforced the importance of being able to test in the privacy of your own home. C2 Sense's goal is to use their patented technology to ensure the same quality of testing you would find in your doctor's office in the comfort of your own home. So, if you're suffering from upper respiratory symptoms like cough, sore throat, nasal congestion, or a headache, keep your eyes out for C2 Sense as they are developing testing targeting for upper respiratory conditions such as COVID and flu. If you want to learn more, see what they're up to at haloreader.com. All right. I have to get better at that. But so thankful for C2 Sense and the great work they're doing. John, welcome back now to the show. And one question I think a lot of people want to know, and you talked about it, is how long does it take to fall asleep? Now, you said that was about 5 to, I think you said somewhere around 15, 20 minutes. How do you think about that whole process? Like, at what point would you say, hey, look, you're actually now struggling to fall asleep? And then what would your advice be?
Well, I think a lot of a person's approach to sleep needs to really attend to the expectations. Like, what are you expecting your body to do for you when you go to bed? And so there's a lot of context of what time are you going to bed? What have you been doing? Things like that. So, part of a sleep evaluation tries to get at a lot of that. But I think one thing we know for sure is that one of the key concepts of good sleep is sleep regularity, sleep scheduling. And I think Alex spoke previously about, burning the candle at both ends, staying up, all night long, and then on the weekends crashing. We don't think that's good for you anymore. And the regularity of sleep is quite important. So what does that mean? Well, that usually means generally having a fixed bedtime and a fixed wake-up time, with some wiggle room there. In my mind, the most important component of that is actually when you wake up, which is a little bit upside down in terms of people's experience, because what you're asking is what happens when you go to bed and what should you expect? So if you're going to bed at the right time, if you're engaging in the right activities and it's, after a full day, you should be able to fall asleep generally within about 10 to 20 minutes. Sometimes a lot faster. We've all been there. Sometimes a little slower, but it also depends on what you're doing. And I think, that highlights some of the important concepts of sort of protecting your sleep. The analogy I've always used with people is it's like landing an airplane. You can't bring that 747 down from 30,000 feet in a second, right? So you got to bring that down gradually. How gradually? Well, that's anyone's guess there. But I think generally 20 minutes or so, you should be there. What you're doing ahead of sleep is really important. So if you go from, let's say, doing a Zumba class and then you jump into bed, you're exercising, you try to fall asleep, your body's not going to respond. If you go from playing video games for 2 hours and then jump into bed, your brain biologically is not ready to shut things down. So context really matters. And generally the recommendation is that 30 minutes before you get into bed, you're ramping things down. You're not exposing yourself to as much bright light. You're not as physically engaged. You're maybe reading a book, these types of things that let that brain sort of turn down the activating systems that are so essential for normal function.
I've read that the kind of normal or average amount of sleep we're all supposed to get is somewhere from 7.5 to 8.5. Is that right?
Well, there are population averages, and I think most people target around 7 to 8 hours in adults. But within a population, there's a lot of variability. But there are shorter sleepers, there are longer sleepers around that average. It's hard to know because we don't have a great way to measure what for you, Alex, is the exact amount of sleep. Although I bet you probably have a good sense of what it is.
That's really interesting. Okay, next question. When I have two doctors, I have a lot of personal questions. I take melatonin every night before I go to bed. It seems to work. It could also be a placebo. I don't know. I know there's probably a little bit of science, maybe not. Do you have any view on melatonin?
I do. I mean, there's a lot of science, but there's also a lot of unanswered questions, really. But before I answer that question, I'd turn it back to you, Alex, and ask you, why are you taking it? What are you hoping to do by taking it?
Sleep better. I'm just obsessed with everything that you can opt. I just have now, I've realized how important sleep is. I'm feeling I want to give myself the best chance of having good sleep. And it actually started because I noticed I was waking up. This is before I met you and realized that was a normal thing. But I do have to say, I'm trying to get more deep sleep. And I do notice, again, this may be a placebo effect, that I do feel I get more deep sleep when I take melatonin.
So melatonin is a hormone produced by the brain that governs circadian rhythms and sleep. So it's part of our natural sleep process. It starts to be secreted by the brain, the pineal gland, when the lights go off. And then it is no longer secreted through sort of the middle of the sleep. And then certainly when the lights come on, it's off. So it's a sleep hormone, essentially. Across the lifespan, Alex, melatonin levels change. Like a lot of things with age, they don't get better. So it's not like your melatonin system gets stronger and more effective. Unfortunately, it's kind of the opposite.
So I used to sleep like a log, and then I went through menopause, and now I struggle a little bit more with sleep. So that's when I started taking melatonin.
Yeah, and there's a huge interaction with hormones, both estrogen, testosterone, and so it's bidirectional. So melatonin might affect those hormones, but we know that, for instance, with women in menopause, that those hormones affect the melatonin profile and secretion. So it's complicated, but certainly you've touched on a very common reality, which is poor sleep that coincides with menopause for women. But here's what we know about melatonin. The science of melatonin suggests that taking melatonin before bed helps you get to sleep a little better, a little easier. It appears to be less effective, or it's less clear that it actually does what you're hoping it does, which is keep you asleep, promote deeper sleep. But I think the perception out there is that it's a pretty safe, available tool, a lever that you can maybe pull that doesn't require you to go to a doctor and things like that.
We have made a commitment to our community here, John, that we want to be very actionable. Okay. So it's fascinating to know about how the brain cleanses itself and what happens to neurotransmitters and circadian rhythms. And we just need some brass tacks information. So I'm going to do a piece here, which is sort of like tips, tricks, hacks. Okay. Because people want to know how should they be approaching sleep? You talked about sort of revving down, and I've, because of your counsel, taken that seriously. And so I have my rhythm in the evening where I'm slowly starting to rev down. I'm off my phone, I'm cooling my jets. Okay. And then, we've talked about other pieces. What are the tips and tricks that people need to know?
Well, I think the first trick is really a mind shift, right? And to actually prioritize sleep and see it as a key health intervention, and not like, like we talked earlier about sort of this unfortunate necessary thing that you have to get through so that you can get on with your life and thrive, which, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. And we're all there, but really to prioritize it. And as I mentioned, sleep really changes over a lifespan. So if we had Alex's 20-year-old son on this call, he probably wouldn't have any concerns about his sleep, right? He'd be like, what are you talking about? I sleep fine, which is sort of the converse of a problem, which is, I can sleep anywhere, anytime. But as we age as adults, with each decade, sleep changes. And like I mentioned earlier, sleep does not get better. So for me, the key concept really is that you have to learn to protect your sleep. You're doing it with Transcendental Meditation to get back to sleep, right? But at least do the low-hanging fruit efforts that will get you a better night of sleep. What does that mean? Simple things. This isn't, neuroscience here, but a comfortable bedroom. That has to do with your mattress. That has to do with the temperature. That might have to do with a spouse that's snoring or kicking in the bed next to you. That might have to do with the street noise, things like that. So trying to limit the sensory stimulation that you have during sleep is really important. Noise, light, comfort, these are key things. The other component, and we mentioned this with Alex, is really what is your expectation of sleep? And I see so many people that develop insomnia where, let's say it's triggered. You wake up at 2 a.m, you can't sleep. My wife, she'll start making lists. She goes nuts with the list, right? The kids need this, the house needs that, my job needs this, that type of thing she's thinking. And so, I think it's important to, on one hand, appreciate that waking up is normal. Because what happens is people then start to almost develop a compensatory frustration. Here I am telling you all about how important sleep is. And then if you can't fall asleep, then you get even more anxious about not sleeping. And that's really a challenge, right? And so one tip there is that sometimes when you're just losing the battle, raise your hand if you've lost the battle with sleep. If you're just losing the battle, it's not just going to get better. So one of the recommendations is that you remove yourself from that frustrating environment. Maybe you get up, you go, have a glass of water, you read a book with dim light till your body naturally feels like I can get back to sleep. And then, as it gets to the end of the night, a key tip that I really focus on with folks is really the regularity of your wake up time, because that really governs so much of your function and your subsequent sleep. The sleep is over, but you're setting it's sort of the go signal for the next cycle. And if you're getting that one day at 6 a.m., another day at 9 a.m., another day at 4 a.m., your cycles are always off. So the regularity of getting out of the bed, whether you had a good night or a bad night, is really important.
John, that was something that you told me. And I didn't want to hear that because it was to Alex's point earlier, the concept of banking sleep. And, I have had a hectic career at times where I'm just not getting enough sleep. And I remember calling you and saying like, hey, I just need to sleep. And you've always encouraged me to make sure that I'm listening to my body. But you definitely told me, try to set a time when you wake up in the morning, including on Saturday and Sunday when you're off. Okay. And I have to say that has become really good advice for me. It was hard to take. Right. I have to admit that I did not want to take that advice and I wanted to just sleep in, but I took the advice. And what I found is that by getting up earlier, I found myself more tired later in the day. And so that set time to go to sleep, which for me is about 9:30, 10 o'clock, I was tired and I was ready to go to sleep. And you really worked with me to a certain extent to get that right rhythm. And I try, and I love that term that you use. It's really beautiful.
What's that?
To protect your sleep.
Yeah.
That you really have to take measures to protect your sleep. And it made a big difference for me, but it also took a lot of effort.
Yeah, it doesn't always feel right, particularly if you finally got to sleep and you're having maybe one of those recovery sleeps that Alex cherished so much, and you could sleep till 9 a.m. and recover. But here I'm telling you to, get up at 7 and you go out for a walk. Like that doesn't feel right. But sleep also changes over a lifespan, Kevin, right? And so at this point, I don't know about you guys, but I get to a point where I'm waking up at the same time anyway. My circadian system is relatively rigid versus that teenage brain or that 20-year-old brain that can just sort of sleep in the middle of the afternoon, take a nap in the evening, be awake at 4 a.m. We start to lose that luxury. And so you really got to attend to optimizing your sleep in that circadian zone when your brain is going to give it to you.
John, a couple more things before we wrap our tips and tricks. You hear so much about temperature, right? And so, should it be warm? Should it be cold? Some people talk warm baths. Other people talk about keeping the room super cold. I will mention that my wife and I love the windows open, even when it's 10 degrees outside. So how do you think about temperature and sleeping?
There's two ways to look at temperature. One is just the environmental temperature that you're speaking to, like what's the temperature in your bedroom? Is it cold? Is it hot? What type of blankets do you have? And then there's also body temperature. And for that latter part, body temperature varies over sleep, and temperature regulation during sleep changes. So you might wake up boiling hot at one point, but you don't have any covers on, or you're really cold and you have the covers on. And that's part of normal sleep physiology. But in terms of actual sleep, a lot of it is preference, right? Whether you like it to be cold or hot. The science suggests that taking or being hotter before you go to bed might help promote going to sleep better. But it's not just that you raise the temperature. It's actually, the science suggests that for instance, if you take a warm bath or a warm shower, and so your body temperature elevates a little bit, it's the cooling effect after you leave the bath or the shower. So the active cooling of your body on some level is sleep inducing. So those people that do that are able to fall asleep a little quicker. So for people who are experiencing a little difficulty falling asleep, that might be something that they could do. It's certainly low risk. And then the other issue is just of comfort, really. And so what you prefer, what your partner prefers, or do you sleep alone? Those are things that, you might need to have someone like Esther Perel on to talk about relationship issues.
Well, I'll tell you, I tell my kids, when it comes time to thinking about getting married, make sure you hit the practical stuff. Window open, window closed. Okay, we're almost there, John. I got one last thing, tips and tricks. Weighted blankets. I hear a lot about it. I see a lot of stuff on social media. Where do you land on weighted blankets?
Yeah, it's interesting. Weighted blankets, they kind of snuck up on me, Kevin, honestly, mostly because it's not something that from a neuroscience standpoint, I found particularly compelling. But I've come to view it a little differently now that, well, first off, what's the harm of a weighted blanket? Nothing. Right? What are you going to do? I can't even think of how you'd get harmed by it. So what's the benefit? Well, the benefit, I think, suggests that it does help some people feel a little less anxious, maybe a little bit more in control. And when you're not sleeping well, and I've seen this, dozens, if not hundreds of times, people really feel when they can't sleep that they're out of control at the extremes, right? Like nothing I can do. And all the literature and all the media is telling them, oh, you need to sleep, just sleep better. It's the key to health, and you can't sleep. So it just makes you even more anxious and more out of control. And so if using a weighted blanket helps people, and I think there's some small studies that suggest it might, then I think, it's a pretty low bar, and give it a shot. And if it works for you, great.
Yeah. It's funny. I think about that a lot because I get asked about treatments that just don't have enough data behind them. And so it's kind of hard to land on it and say this is the definitive answer. But you're describing people that are suffering at night. We'll get in a later episode into deep insomnia. I think we did an overview here, but for folks who really suffer from insomnia, they never know what it's going to be like. It's almost like having that 2-month-old baby. You don't know when you're going to sleep again. And that's a form of suffering. And to have some control, even if it's a placebo effect, is important. So I'm with you on this. I think no harm, potential upside, go for it.
Yeah, just think there's a huge swath of people that sort of suffer in silence because no one's there to experience the insomnia with them. It's a lot like pain or migraine. You have to take people at their word. I didn't sleep well last night. It's okay, I can't really access that, my experience of yours. But it's pretty debilitating for people.
First of all, I have a very good friend who suffers from really big, deep sleep issues and has been a lifelong issue. So I really appreciate you guys raising that. Last question.
Yeah.
So again, as you notice, once I started tracking my sleep, it raised a lot of more new questions. So I try to, when I really don't get good sleep, take a nap if I can, and I can put it in my schedule, or I can do it, it's on the weekend. Is napping good, or I think it's probably not bad, but is that sleep? Does that sleep count towards my 7 hours?
Believe it or not, Alex, there's a lot of sleep science around napping, and it's pretty cool. At first, my bias, my disclosure is that I think all sleep is good sleep, provided you're not, behind the wheel of a car or doing something critical. You don't want to be in that situation. But joking aside, really, the napping reality is quite interesting, and there's a lot of studies that show a brief nap really facilitates learning, facilitates improved emotional function, cognitive function, performance. So, thumbs up on the naps. I'll highlight one interesting thing. I bet you've had this. What's the difference between napping, let's say a 20-minute nap, or let's say an hour nap?
An hour, over an hour is not a good nap for me, but 20 minutes is perfect, or 30 minutes is perfect.
Yeah, and here's what we know why that is. So when you cycle through sleep, as we talked about, after about 30 to 45 minutes, you're likely going into that deeper slow wave sleep. So you're actually going deeper down into sleep, and you have to come back out from that, which is why you just feel like, wow, I feel worse than when I lie down at 2 p.m. And so a shorter nap actually is the sweet spot, 20 to 30 minutes. You get rejuvenated, you feel better, and it doesn't steal from your nighttime sleep as much.
I think that both Kevin and I could very happily listen to you for the rest of the day. We know you've got other things to do. So we try and do at the end of the show just kind of key takeaways. So both of you guys tell me if I've got them, and John, I will not be insulted if I missed a few. And first is just the incredibly high value of sleep, and that we didn't maybe focus on it enough until a few decades ago, and now we are. 2, that sleep is really tied to everything else. It's tied to what you eat. It's tied to, and I actually wanted to ask you to repeat your mnemonic just because I think it's really smart. And if I tried, I would botch it. So would you mind just in our key takeaways repeating quickly your mnemonic?
Sure. So it was clean sleep. So the word clean is just, the mechanics, the housekeeping of the brain, cleaning the brain. And then sleep, we've got really, we're trying to be smart. So we're learning, smart, learning. We've got executive function, we've got emotional function, and we have performance. And this is what sleep really unlocks for us to really function optimally. There's some nuances within that, and there are different things, but those are some of the key takeaways that I think of, like, why do you need to sleep? Well, there's a whole litany of things that you need, and sleep gives
the other
them to
thing
you.
I really appreciate you saying, and I've never focused on this as much, is being really consistent about when you wake up. That's actually maybe more important than being consistent about when you go to bed.
Absolutely. And this is something, it's almost like an afterthought. Most people don't think about when they wake up. They just think about when they went to sleep and how the quality of the sleep they experienced was. But waking up doesn't do anything for your last night of sleep, but it definitely helps you for the next night. And so some people advocate that you should turn the story upside down, which is your sleep starts with when you wake up in the morning. And that's the start of the whole cycle. So it's not so much an afterthought.
This is a fascinating conversation, John. I really want to thank you for coming on and being a part of this. You and I have been having this conversation for a long time. And so it is definitely an iterative process. And so I think I would just say this, start somewhere. Right. And John just gave a piece of advice, start in the morning. Right. And it may be super painful to say, I'm going to get up every morning at 7 a.m., including Saturday and Sunday. But I can tell you that I did that begrudgingly, and John kept encouraging me, and it made a difference. So that would be about the only thing, Alex, that I might add to it is you got to bite the bullet at a certain point and start somewhere and then work on the other things too.
Great. And lastly, John, I hope you can come back because this is just the beginning of our long list of questions, and it's incredibly informative, everything you share with us today.
I would be really delighted to come back. I mean, we've really just scratched the surface. Sleep is just the frontier of neuroscience. So we'll learn more every year, and we'll have further conversations that really impact everyone.
Thank you for watching our show. Actually, because Dr. Cronin has agreed to come back, you can put any questions in the comments below in our YouTube channel about questions you might have about sleep. And if we can, we'll have him address them the next time he's on. But also, if there are any other topics, we'd love to hear what you guys are interested in. And so please go on our YouTube comments and leave medical topics or questions that you would like us to address, and we will try and get to them. Okay, our last thing, we're still trying this out, is our sharing beauty segment, which Kevin will explain what it is, and then he is going to share some beauty.
So this is something we've been doing in my family for, my wife cleaned it up for me over 12 years now. And that is that when you see something beautiful, shout it out so that we all are sure to see it. And so that's what I'm doing. And this one's a pretty personal one. I went through a tough year in 2015. I was transitioning in my career, which isn't always easy to do. And I find that my brain sometimes can be my best friend, often my worst enemy. And I came across someone by the name of Shirzad Chamine. He is a professor at Stanford, and he talks about positive intelligence. And what he did was he did a presentation to the Google staff and talked about controlling your brain and sort of understanding how your brain can be really powerful and helps you, but also can detract and can sort of get in your way. And so, Chev, let's be sure that we drop in that YouTube video. You guys can check it out. It's worth every minute, and it really helped me in that year. Time for me to thank all of you. Thanks for being a part of this community. It means a lot to us. I want to thank Batsheva Gez for producing the show. See you all next week.
See you later.
This show's content represents the personal opinions of Alex Wallace and me. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and does not create a physician-patient relationship with me. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or your general health. That was not terrible.